thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future and into the future of board leadership in particular. But before we walk into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a number of small towns. My father is in mining, so as a consequence, I moved a lot. In terms of what I would call my hometown, probably Rustenburg in the northern Western Province, because we lived there the longest, and I went to boarding school at the time, so probably the better part of 7 years of my childhood at home is where I grew up, and that's what I would have called home then. Now, in my married capacity, Johannesburg is my home, and in fact, more so now in lockdown than ever before.
So, what was your dream career when you grew up?
I actually wanted to be a librarian. I immersed myself in books. I was a big reader. And in fact, a couple of things and reasons for that. I believed reading could help me live longer, just in terms of being able to contribute to being able to survive in various scenarios. I also think you can absorb more from physical books, and I used to stamp my own books as if I was an imaginary librarian and share them with an imaginary audience. I think maybe the accountant in me came out of the rigor and structure to put systems in early on. And I do think you also develop skills for the future. So there's something about books that allow you to both escape, ward off brain deterioration, and just really the ability to imagine and create has been so important. So that was me. I was going to be a librarian, possibly.
So can you tell us, what are your favorite books?
I have a number of favorite books. Tuesdays with Morris is one, and actually just recently reread it, just in terms of thinking about where we are and humanity and what's important. I'm currently reading The Tattooist of Auschwitz. I actually read multiple books, as well as Emergence, which is an interesting book by Stephen Johnson, and more specifically, it's different. It's the fact that ignorance is partly useful, and how to encourage random encounters and look for patterns and signs and paying attention to people and your neighbors. And it's just a very thoughtful book, quite smart. It's not a new book in the process, but it really gives us a glimpse. And this time it's quite fascinating around the connected lives of ants, of brains, of cities, of software, and even more so how connected we are.
And who inspired you in those early days?
My parents both inspire me. My father, because he has a mantra that he lives by, which is never lose your all for life. And that's genuinely about being curious, being interested in what's happening around you, the people, and taking nothing for granted. And as a consequence, you always encouraged asking questions, but with the intent to understand and not necessarily to argue. And I've taken that lesson with me through life. My mother, because she believes everyone deserves a chance. Every person counts, and I think more so than ever, the fact that the one thing I've learned over time is that change is not the only constant. The only constant is we are human first. So both of them really have shaped in my nature and nurture how I've turned out, and literally, what's been important for me growing up. And with my own family, I've got 4 children as well, and that's been really important.
And where did you start your career?
I started my career at, it depends. We've been working at a young age. I used to work and do holiday jobs. I've always worked for pocket money, but my first proper career was at KPMG as an articled clerk in the Johannesburg office.
And now you've held a number of very senior positions. You are a board member at a number of prominent organizations. Would you say there was a turning point, or maybe a number of turning points in your career?
So I think 2 come to mind. One is my segue into the human capital space. So when I joined Barclays, I actually joined the financial services sector in learning and development, which was quite different. I'd always had a very structured career in the accounting, auditing, and advisory side, and wanted to take a slightly different track. I had spent a bit of time at KPMG and at Standard Bank initially, really working on some of the training initiatives, being involved in Train the Trainer and in growing people, but it has never been my actual career trajectory. And moving into that role taught me a lot. One, I incorrectly thought it would be easier than my finance job. but being intensely involved only in people is quite different. And I think I learned a number of lessons. One, how important taking people with you is. I think one of the things someone had asked me is, it's one thing for people to work with you. It's another thing to influence and have them work for you. And more importantly, to empower them and enable them to really take their own career and the business forward by themselves. And I think I learned that moving into the human capital space. Very interesting time in my career. One, we were demystifying the technical components of banking, so great learning. But two, we also were instituting performance management for the first time. And in one of our offices, one of our international offices, it takes 7 people to start a union, and our exco started a union. So it was quite an interesting influencing time as well around the importance of who we reward, how we reward them, and what we do. So that was a big segue in my career in terms of the shift of focus from a technical perspective and having to prove credibility, largely because, often people said, oh, here comes HR with their HR tissues. And having been a technical accountant to a large extent, that was quite an interesting experience. And realizing how important that element was, I think, has shaped how I lead, has shaped how I think about people, and has shaped, how we take an organization along on the journey, as opposed to just really push through and operate from a technical perspective where you can solve, or rather get your point across a bit like a hammer and a nail. So that was a important career segue for me from the people side. And then moving from financial services, really coming out of international banking predominantly, and then choosing both from a life stage perspective and just, I had twins wanting to come home for a bit, working then with UBank, which was co-owned or was owned by the National Union of Mine Workers and the Chamber of Mines, and really getting to understand the politics behind business was quite a change factor, and also working with the most vulnerable in our society. So understanding how much every rand counts, every dollar counts, and how you invest it. And there I think I learned both the return on investment and return on integrity were absolutely important, and that what you do can change lives. And I do believe financial services, both banking and insurance, should be noble professions, both from helping build businesses and helping move from being more subsistence to greater spaces. And in the current times, for example, helping keep people's lives together in tough times. So those were 2 big pieces. And then moving from that more recently into professional services, and the rationale for that was really wanting to understand where your shareholder lives with you every day, what that's like. And so I've absolutely had a number of different challenges in my career, but each of them has seen me grow, bring different skills to the party, and then learn to use and work with the people around me far more deliberately, because we're only as good as our team, and ideally we need to leave any place we leave better than it was when we found it.
Now, Joanne, you've also been very active in the 30% Club and gender mainstreaming. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in that field?
So I think gender mainstreaming is important. I think diversity is critical, and it's not just about righting what may feel like the wrongs of the past, but really it is about making sure we create a better school of thought. So you have better decisions. It's been proven statistically, both from a commercial perspective as well as a staff engagement perspective, that diversity of individuals, culture, race, gender, etc., really create better ideas, because you can see problems from multiple lenses. And the opportunity to work with the 30% Club on that has been invaluable, partly around getting a number of like-minded to some degree, but more importantly, people with the right or similar purpose and intention to want to make a difference around the room, and collectively, actively doing that with the 30% Club has been incredibly rewarding. And that goes from the Leaders Walk programs to the Boardwalk program to the Board Masterclass, and really grooming young leaders that have a voice, have a forum that they can use their voice in, have an opportunity to learn in an environment that's safe, and have the opportunity to share stories that help them leapfrog, hopefully, and not have to learn the same lessons we learned or earn the same scars we have, but rather do better. And I think the 30% Club has created that platform and forum, and it really is about everyone giving in, and that the takeaways there create a sustainable space. So being able to build breadth and depth across genders has been very rewarding. in that regard. There's still a lot to do. I don't think we close the gap quite easily, and research has shown that based on what we've seen in churn on boards and, in fact, limited movement to some extent. And I think the opportunity is now where more and more we realize the benefit of a collective and diverse team in a crisis.
And what would you say is driving you today?
From a purpose perspective,
yes,
I think wanting to leave a legacy. I think the reality is that we live in we talked about VUCA all the time, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous states, and now we are living it. And I think the legacy here is that actually to ensure that there's no key person dependency, that the teams I work with, the people I work with, the people I engage with, friends and family that we connect to, that we leave something behind that is better than it was, if anything, more humane than it was. And that technology, which was never going to be an or scenario, so not people or tech, but rather an and scenario, should help free up time. One, time to think. Two, when you think and think differently, you can be more creative. And three, we can hopefully come up with better solutions in a time of crisis. Often we are more creative and innovative about how we solve problems. And this will hopefully teach us not to dwell on them too long, but rather to work through them and around them. And I suppose I'm hoping my legacy would be with my teams is that they almost found themselves a little bit like a Waze or a Garmin, that they recalibrate and we realize there are multiple ways to reach a destination. And that as long as we're agile enough and willing enough to think differently, we can probably get there. And patience and taking people with us is going to be incredibly important. So from a purpose perspective, it's about keeping people going. I am optimistic by nature. And so helping people see beyond the current pothole they might be standing in front of, or obstacle or issue or process, is what could we do with this? What's the silver lining in the cloud? It's not always easy. And I think more and more we need to remind individuals and people and those closest to us, those we work with, colleagues, those that may be despondent, that there is going to be a world beyond this. And that is whether it's a turnaround structure in a business, whether it's a tough challenge you're solving, whether you've inherited an issue, but that actually we need to think and move through it. And that for me is very important from a purpose perspective. I'd like to look back and see that I was a king and queen maker, so to speak. So for me, what would be incredible is to watch people, come into their own, to really see people own their spaces, and that actually they can come out saying, we did this and we did this well. And then that for me has been very important as a leader. I don't ever want to be background music, but I would like individuals to realize their best potential. So this moment is about helping people unpack the art of possibility in everything they do.
Now, let's talk about leadership, and specifically board leadership. What does the future of leadership mean to you?
Sure, I think leadership in the current times requires a significant amount of courage, also authenticity. I like the Roosevelt speech, commonly known as the man in the arena, is the person that keeps up, keeps going, keeps getting up when it's toughest. And I think that's going to be required. Not only do we need to be resilient in current times, we have to be decisive as leaders. We have to be authentic. And I think the reality is it is okay now to be vulnerable. And actually, the reality is that you're going to have to ask for help, put yourself out there. The trust equation is even more important now as you move forward bravely. And I think that those skills are very key going into, I won't say it's a new normal, but it's important. And I think I've learned a couple of lessons there from a leadership perspective. One, everyone can help us learn something. And in fact, even more so as we set up agilely in the current environment, understanding the value of the people at the coalface, literally, that help us get things done. There's a big difference between managers and leaders, and people have to recognize that. There are those that execute incredibly well, that manage and get tasks done, but leadership requires vision. It requires a sense of intuition. You need to use your head, your heart, and your gut in the current scenarios, and all three of your brains need to be working to solve both problems and to keep the people together. you are the glue in the space, that it's difficult. It can be lonely, and I think leaders need to be grounded. It's a little bit like abseiling. You can't hold someone unless you are grounded in that construct. It's the same thing. So find what grounds you, be very self-aware, and no person's an island. We need to make sure we've got people we can lean on in the spaces. And everyone wants to, in a lot of the pieces now, saying reinvent yourself, look at yourself, etc. Self-awareness is essential, what we're good at, what we're not good at, and how we surround ourselves so that we've got people around us that actually fill the gaps with the things we're not good at. For example, if you're not a detailed person, but you are a visionary and you have the ideas, you need to make sure you've got the detailed people behind you to execute. If you are about, keeping everyone together in the spaces, and that intuition allows you to drive a team forward, you need to have the other individuals that can execute, visualize, and take it forward. Feedback from your network is important. I think we need to ask, how are we doing? Does this work? What do you need? And ask more open-ended questions. To the point earlier about one of the lessons my dad taught me is to listen to understand and not to argue. Even more so as leaders, that's really important, to hear what our people are saying, our clients are saying, our country, civil society is saying right now. Communicate. I think all too often in a crisis, we've got our heads down and we're trying to get stuff done. And now we need to make sure people hear from us. I think people fill silence with assumptions, and sometimes that can be deafening. So communicate is important. And then to be present. You can still feel people, and you can feel when they're fully invested. And I think one of the things I've learned is that, the eyes are the gateway to the soul to some degree, but you can tell if someone is absolutely present in the moment. And if you're in that moment and you give of your best in that moment, I think that goes a long way around taking people with you. People feel heard, the attention goes a long way, and we need to get our arms around everyone around us.
Now, Joanne, when you speak to aspiring leaders, what is it you tell them about social media? How should they use social media to build their own leadership brand?
So it's quite interesting. I think I've, in my career, kept social media from my personal side quite separate from my career side. And I've realized that actually people need to know the whole you, which is quite important. And the opportunity to authentically share what you're thinking is important around social media. Sometimes our very good, both board members and C-suite leaders, people that have been considered role models, almost seem untouchable. We wonder how they got there. More importantly, we wonder what sacrifices they possibly have made, and would we do the same? And I think if we can share our stories, or share relevant reading material, or share experiences, it allows people to connect with us. It allows people to put their hand up and ask questions. I do believe you're only as good as your network's network, and we can use social media to improve that, both the size of our network, who is in our network, how we reach out to them, whether it's from doing businesses or just because actually we believe we can actually adapt in the process because you've got more connections, more contacts. And I think that is important, is work out who to follow, what actually resonates with you, and then share. We just don't do that enough. And I've been quite deliberate about reading more, the opportunity to then share my thoughts more, being comfortable with sharing our thoughts. I think by nature, coming through the finance function, for example, and out of audit and advisory, we're less about going out there proactively and more responsive on a reactive basis in terms of just professionally skeptical and almost humble to a large degree. And the reality is now is about, it is important to share. It is important to have an opinion, and it is important to at least do some research. And I think social media is an opportunity to really gain traction from a network perspective, to understand what others are going through, and to learn faster from each other as we go through the process.
No.
And if you don't know how to do it, there are so many people willing to put their hand up to help, that I do think that's a great opportunity. I've yet to have anyone say, no, I'm not keen to connect. And I've been fortunate enough to be a mentor to a number of people that have connected with me on LinkedIn and a number of social platforms. And I've also learned from individuals that I've plugged into, and more so now where we've done a lot of virtual board meetings, so to speak, or introductory calls. It's been very rewarding, actually.
And Joanne, when you speak to, or when you advise future leaders, especially future board leaders, what are the biggest challenges you would want them to be aware of, or maybe the pitfalls that they should take into account?
So from a board member perspective, I think what's important is, first of all, understand the value you can bring to the board. It's really important that you know what it is you can contribute. Then understand what motivates you. Why do you want to be on that board? What are you learning? What are you gaining? What difference can you make? We talked earlier about purpose, and your board membership should really align to pieces that connect to your purpose and what's important to you. And that will also help drive your genuine interest, genuine curiosity, and commitment to making a difference. Understand the candor of the board. So what's the level of transparency, honestness? How does the board operate? That needs to be robust. I think gone are the days where it is, really nice to be on multiple boards and it almost, from an ego perspective, looks great. You need to look right and left, be very deliberate about who you sit on a board with, be very deliberate about the company you choose to then be on the board of, because collectively you're going to make decisions that will live beyond you. And I think what's important is to make the right decision, that if you had to live with it, you could live with it with your principles intact, your ethics intact, your integrity intact, and stand the test of good governance. And so for board members, people wanting to go onto the board, if there's an opportunity and you've never been on the board, and that's where the 30% club comes into process, and leaders will, how do we work at grooming you, coaching you, working with you on the board masterclass, so that you've got both the network as well as the professional connectedness to make sure you can make the right decisions. Do you have enough time? Do you really understand how much time it takes to understand how a board operates? What is the mandate of the company that you run, and what is the experience you have to be able to contribute? And so I do think that decisions to sit on a board need to be very, very deliberate. And the first 3 points are probably the most pertinent. What's the candor like? What value can you add, and what motivates you and other board members? Because there does need to be alignment so that collectively you do make the right decisions. And often where you are on a board by choice, in the sense that financially or for a number of various reasons, this is where you are going to make the greatest contribution. By choice, you can make good decisions, and decisiveness and decisions you can stand behind are very important in tough times.
And Joanne, if you were to design a curriculum for future leaders, what are some of the new skills that you would want to factor in?
I think one of the pieces around being genuinely curious, understand the business of the business, as opposed to just understand the board deliverables in the pack. What's interesting for me from a leadership perspective is often the information you get is there to manage the questions you might ask, as opposed to enough information to make insightful decisions. And so be genuinely curious, ask questions, don't believe the first story you hear, and really interrogate the information and the data that you get. You need the right data up and carved out in the right way to make appropriate decisions, so that you can be forward-looking and not just retrospectively review where it's at. So curiosity is very critical. Getting time to know the people, because we are still relational individuals, and it's very important in a trust equation. So where do people see themselves in terms of being able to deliver consistently, reliably all the time, and for whom and what? And where do they put themselves in that equation? So often in the trust equation, individuals that do not put themselves first in terms of shining through the process, but rather the organization and the people in the organization are very important in terms of creating trust. So I think understanding the culture is very important, and the people. And culture is not necessarily set from the top, but really it's how the business survives. And businesses that have an open culture, learning culture, and a culture that fails forward, so to speak, really have the ability to then push for discretionary effort. There is trust in the organization, which is generally largely off the back of feeling psychologically safe. So you need to do your homework, I think, going forward. And I think as new leaders, we taught the technical pieces, so we can unpack a problem and solve it with multiple tools and skills. But the MBA you get turning around a business or working in a tough environment, current crisis as an example, or working in a difficult scenario is probably the best school you will ever go to in the process. So I think working out who your own board is an important proposition. And when I say that, who do you go to for people issues? Who do you sound board with? Who is advocating, for example, for you in public? Who could you check in your ideas with? And who has got the wisdom, so to speak, that you can tap into? For me, those are important leadership skills, because no person is an island. And you need that. You need to be able, if you're going to lead through a crisis, do that, as no one's alone. And I think more and more important is self-certainty to one degree is going to be key. So just to keep people that in mind, foster proper connection is key. Acting inclusively. Often we're a specialist and we're good at what we do, and sometimes we create our own monsters. So making sure from an inclusive perspective, we lead with our heart, not just our head, is a skill. Bring everyone along each step of the way. Communication, as I said, is so important, and how we communicate and at what level, and the ability to change how we say what we say based on the audience, but making sure the underlying message is consistent. Being decisive, and sometimes we wait so long for clarity, people fill the spaces with their own assumptions. So that is going to be an important skill. And then being able to be agile, that is important for building your own resilience as well as organizational resilience. I think you can't operate in the current environment if there's only one way to solve a problem, or only one route you're taking. To the point earlier, we're a little bit like waves. We have to constantly recalibrate to make sure we can keep moving.
And as a mentor to future leaders, Joanne, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
So I had an upcoming leader in our Angola operations at one point, Albert Sante, wonderful, went in as a financial manager, now as the CFO in Ghana, and he's done incredible stuff. And I think the feedback has been about not only owning your space, but when you go into a new country and you don't speak the language, it was about establishing the right relationships, understanding how decisions are made, understanding who the influencers are, and then doing enough research and making sure you've got really enough information to make the right decisions to build your credibility quite quickly. Nothing comes easily. You have to work hard at it, and you do need to be consistent. So if you're consistent, trust is earned in small acts, and you're consistent all the time in your delivery, and you've made the time to meet the people, you can do great things, even in a foreign environment. And I saw that happen. I saw that taken to heart. We are still connected, and we worked together many, many years ago. And he really has just done the most incredible things. And I think for me, that has been truly rewarding. I do think if we get it right, at some point, there is a shift between mentor and mentee, in terms of the fact that you land up, being mentored by those you've grown through or grown with in the process. And so Albert is a great example of that. Also, being able to have courageous conversations early on, where individuals haven't necessarily been performing in their role, and particularly when you take on a new team and no one's actually told them what was expected or necessarily had the conversation about what hasn't worked. And I've got two cases. One is a lady called Davina that really took that to heart, and then landed up championing operational rigor across the region. So I think there are examples of people owning their spaces when someone takes the time to invest in them. And I think mentorship to a large extent is a lot like parenthood, in the sense that you want to live long enough to be a grandparent, because I think that is when my children will truly appreciate how much I love them. Because giving you a tough message when you want to groom a self-sufficient, contributing individual to the GDP that can think for themselves, be able in difficult situations to find the resilience to stand up and keep going, requires you to be tough in some of the decisions that you make. And to be courageous in the conversations that you have. And you're fortunate enough with parenthood that if you live long, you actually the feedback of someone saying, wow, I realized how much you cared and I'm better for it, hopefully. Whereas when you're doing that as a team leader, manager, and then as a in the C-suite where you're running the business, even as a board member, those tough, courageous conversations, if they are the right ones to be had, know that you may not live long enough for someone to come and say thank you, but hopefully you will have shaped and changed their lives and their careers and their impact for the better. So that's been very important for me to keep close. And I think one of the really key attributes that's important for me is people should work hard and work well and deliver for you, whether you are next to them or not. So as a leader, the reality is the environment you foster and the culture you foster, and as a mentor, the same thing, is you shouldn't be a dependency. You should be an enabler in that space. And I've loved that in the mentoring relationships I have. In fact, my 30% Club Gender Mainstream Award for Positive Role Model was actually a nomination from one of my mentees, which I am forever appreciative of and actually quite blown away by. And Fatima is owning her own space. She's learning as she goes. She is forging new ways forward, and she's very, articulate and able to work out where she's at and what she's doing. And it's incredible to watch someone grow, take the feedback, which is a gift. So either you take it and you appreciate it, or you decide you don't want it. But watching her take the feedback and actually making it her own in terms of how she's responded to it, and then coming back with, thoughts on what could be done differently or how to help the next person, with the view that for every person we help, you should put a hand up or put your hand out to give someone a hand up. So I'm very fortunate to have those as top of mind examples.
And Joanne, are there any role models of leadership that you have come across in your career that you would recommend future leaders could learn from?
So it's interesting. I read an article by Ryan Weaver, which captured 5, role model pieces, and then I'll share a specific role model with you. But one was, I quite smiled at this, to never stop learning, like Captain James T. Kirk, and possibly that's even more important now as we go where no man has gone before. And to forge working relationships, a lot like Nelson Mandela, where you start without an agenda or assumptions, but really you're looking forward to set aside feelings of hostility, build a strong relationship, and be responsible for what we inherit, what we own, and how we act. So Nelson Mandela is definitely one of those. Being resilient like a superhero is what I always say to my kids, is that, we're not going to be overcome by the first defeat, but we keep moving forward. And we've seen that in current businesses and businesses that have come through, for example, Business Rescue, with leaders making very tough decisions. MTN is an example, and what has been done there in the spaces, I think is quite key. Being a storyteller has been even more important, and possibly maybe not quite like Shakespeare, but the opportunity to share the stories you've learned and the scars earned. And we've seen those stories come through with some of the Cell C pieces, for example, or through some of the banking crisis. An African bank comes to mind as a South African context. But as people have recovered in the process, I think that's been important from a leadership perspective. And then to surround ourselves with A players, and being able to unlock the A player in individuals. And that's really come off the back of Steve Jobs to a large degree. So I think those 5 pieces resonate with me. But in my own career, in terms of role model behavior, I think one of the people I've worked with was Mark Williams, and he always said to me, what's the pink slip in my pocket? And I remember looking at him quite shocked, because the pink slip was never a good thing. And he said, no, if you're going to do something in a difficult environment, what is it we're going to do? Have we buttoned it? Have we documented it properly? And the reason it's in your pocket is if I'm going into the shop to buy a leather couch and the salesman is so good, I land up walking out with a purple futon. The reality is I've suffered from strategic seduction, and make sure that I take out of my pocket what's on that pink slip, so that I don't get sucked into something along the way. So you can be agile, you can think differently, and you must assess opportunities, but assess it against a baseline and where you wanted to go to. So that was important to me. Andy Bainbridge, he's worked with me at Barclays and Standard Chartered, and the reason for that is he always wanted to understand what the people at the front line said, and the fact that people closest to the client counted a lot. And I took that away from him, and that he never demanded anything from anyone that he wouldn't do himself. And I love that. And I think I've taken that throughout my career. So if I've said to someone, give it to me at this time, I promise you I'll review it then, because people feel valued when they know that someone's looking at what they're doing, we'll give them the feedback, and then allow them to own the recognition. So you're allowed to have your thumbprint on something, but allow people to shine if they take up the opportunity you've given to them and they own it. So I think those are some examples of role models that I've had the privilege to work with. Diana Layfield is also probably another one. She was quite honest. Another lady, Joanna, where it was all about saying, very important that you hire smarter than you are in the process. It allows you to step up and step out. And so in most of my jobs, there is a successor, the team is stable and capable and can continue. Without me, it allows us to do bigger, greater things, and it allows people to shine. And I think I've taken away various lessons from different individuals that have set me up for where I am now and allowed me to hopefully contribute to other people realizing their full potential and making an impact in the businesses, communities, and in their own homes.
So, Joanne, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
So I would love to connect with your listeners. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I am on Facebook, although Facebook's far more from a family-orientated private piece, and the rationale for that is my father worked in the DRC, and the only thing he had access to was Facebook. So that gives you the chronicles of the Pohl family, but professionally, LinkedIn. And then I'm always happy to connect with someone directly on email with the first port of call on LinkedIn. But my email account is jo.pohl.za@gmail.com. And that's my personal account. And we are human first. For me, people are incredibly important. And in fact, the humane in humanity is really going to be crucial going forward.
And last but not least, is there one thing that you would really like to convey to our listeners that they should take away and implement in their own leadership?
In terms of the leadership style going forward, I think one thing that I've learned in terms of from your own leadership perspective is to always ask why you're in the role you're in, why you're doing what you're doing. And if you can ask the why, then you can follow it up with a yes and approach. And the reason I say that is understand the person, or the purpose rather, understand where you are, why you're there, and for what reason, and then do the yes and. So the answer is not no. We're going to ask the next questions. If I say to you, we're going to open a new operation in X country, it'll be a yes and then ask, what about this, what about that? Because all too often, we curb innovative thinking, creative thinking, the opportunity, or how we unpack risks by saying no. And so ask why, and then reframe how you respond with yes and.
Well, Joanne, thank you so much for making time to share your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership.
Thank you so much for your time. It's such a pleasure and a privilege to be asked to even be interviewed. Thank you very much, Nik.